However, the utilitarian theory is not without criticism. The utilitarian justification of intellectual property right, on the other hand, is criticized because it has not been able to balance private and public interests. Private intellectual property restricts the use of ideas. Patent regime based on incentive system restricts the people other than the first person to register the idea from freely using that idea. Let's take the example of a person who's come up with a new technology. If a patent is granted to that new technology, then no one else can use that technology for a period of 20 years unless the person secures a license from the patent holder. Neither can modifications be made to such an innovation until the expiry of the 20-year monopoly period. If any additions or modifications have to be made to a new technology, then the person will have to wait for a good 20 years or secure a license and possibly make changes, which can actually be expensive for the society. Granting property rights to intangible ideas actually impedes the flow of knowledge and also prevents or delays downstream innovation. Though there is a system of disclosure under the patent system, it provides exclusive ownership to the person who owns the patent. Further, today the owner of the invention can restrict others from freely using the invention for a certain period of time. Had the patent system prevailed during the time when the wheel was invented, it would have restricted others from freely using the invention. This would have seriously restricted the development of mankind, as many important inventions, whether small or big, or improvements, immediately followed after the invention of the wheel. Thus, the intellectual property rights as such does not exactly allow free flow of ideas, and the restriction on the diffusion of technology in a way impedes innovations based on original patents. Further, there is also a negative effect if it tends to have on the market as such. By providing patent protection for 20 years, what it invariably does is it eliminates competitors in the market and creates a monopoly situation that prevents others from entering the industry. This in a way leads to patent holder controlling the price of the product in the market, and the society may not benefit from such innovation. A classic example of this occurs generally in the pharmaceutical industry, wherein a manufacturer of a life-saving drug, generally when he has obtained a patent monopoly for a period of 20 years, would not allow others to actually enter the market. This basically results in a situation where the patent holder can effectively keep increasing the prices of life-saving drugs. And with drugs, everyone knows that if you do not take the drugs, you will not be able to actually get cured, or probably it could be fatal, right? So this is the kind of price that one would actually pay for having an intellectual property system which is fairly restrictive on competition, fairly restrictive in terms of downstream innovation, fairly restrictive in terms of flow of information, right? With that, we come to the conclusion of the utilitarian justification of intellectual property. Next, we basically look into Locke's labor theory. One of the powerful bases for justifying intellectual property right lies in the belief that a person deserves the fruit of his labor. This was largely espoused by John Locke in his second treatise of government. Locke basically asserts that all that is in nature is provided by God, right? And it is available to all men as it is held in common for the benefit of all. Basically, to expand on what Locke believes is all that is available in the nature is largely basically created by God, and this should not be monopolized or held as property by a particular individual. In fact, it should be allowed for everyone to enjoy what is actually given by God. So he says no individual can have prior claim over substances that are available in nature as it is meant for the enjoyment of the entire humanity, right? Now, but Locke puts in a certain rider here. That rider basically is, Locke asserts that when individual exerts his labor over resources, he can basically claim it as his property because he has added value through his labor. Say for instance, if an individual digs the ground and while digging he manages to kind of get gold, then according to Locke, that gold would actually become the property of the individual because the individual was the one who actually used his labor to dig and find the gold, right? So Locke's version of this labor justification is based on the assumption that each individual has prior property rights in one's body, right? He says that every individual has a property right in one's own body. So according to Locke, labor exerted by an individual is his own property as he is the owner of his body. It is impossible to separate labor and its product. So once the labor is mixed to something that exists in nature and it is transformed, then it is absolutely difficult to kind of make a differentiation as to what existed in nature and whether it is mixed with some kind of a labor. Here only the person's effort is relevant, no less to others, as a precondition for property acquisition. So the moment a person mixes his labor in getting something that already exists in nature, he has property rights over it. Thus, anything an individual mixes his labor with becomes his property. No one has a superior or conflicting claim over it. Now, Locke would readily grant patent right if an individual exerts labor to come up with an innovative product or a machine that is useful. For instance, James Watt used his labor to develop and improve steam engines that could be used in locomotives. Watt's invention added value and spurred the growth of the economy. Locke's labor theory can be used to justify patent protection for Watt's steam engine as he had mixed his labor to develop a new technology. As per Locke, an author, painter, photographer, musician who has exerted his labor to express his original thoughts in the form of a book, paint, photo, or music album should readily be granted a copyright. But Locke also kind of brings in a certain proviso to this, saying that we need to have and we need to look at certain conditions. What exactly is that condition? He calls it as a sufficiency proviso. According to Locke, property rights can be allowed only if it does not deny the others of resources existing in nature. If there are enough resources available in nature, then property rights can be claimed over resources when a person exerts labor over it. Locke expresses concern that if a particular substance is not available in abundance, then property rights over it would deny others of access to that scarce resource. In such instances, an individual who has exerted his labor over the scarce resource cannot claim property rights in it. Thus, Locke would have an objection if natural phenomenon or natural resources like genes are monopolized, even if an individual has exerted labor to identify or discover its existence, as it would prevent others from using it for a certain period of time. But Locke's labor theory is not without its criticism. According to Robert Nozick, fruits of labor is usually valuable, and property rights enables the laborer to appropriate this value. Nozick clarifies that Locke allowed private property right only if there is enough left for others from the common pool of resources. He explained that Locke only allowed private property rights if it does not cause harm to others and there is enough left for others. For instance, if natural resources are scarce and too many people are dependent on its availability, then if a person has mixed his labor, he he cannot claim property rights in it, as it would deprive others of it. Thus, granting a patent to a person or an entity that limits access to others would certainly be a matter of concern to Locke.